Happy Saturday, everybody. We made it to the weekend. Josh here with On the Wrong Lead, joined as always by Matt Carlson for another episode of You Gotta Be Sha Tinning Me. In typical On the Wrong Lead fashion, Matt, you had a hell of a Wednesday.
I did, and not posting anything. And actually, it was funny. I was messaging you on the side. I always go through and like pull my data and like do all this stuff, and get analysis. And just between the kids and all that, like my data got screwed up. I didn't pull what I did, so I had to go back to like the old fashioned way, like using stuff that the site provides, and just kind of going off of like I used the DRF, like Skynet forms or RaceNet forms or whatever you want to call them. And I hit like 5 races in a row, and I'm like, this is the disaster. Like I've spent so much time putting all this stuff together, and it all sucks because I can just look at a form for 5 minutes and end up just rolling these races through. Like I hit the middle pick three, I was like picking winners left and right, and I'm like, great. Of course, when I don't post anything, don't pull my data, it all starts working again. So, good for me. Good for me spending a whole bunch of time for stuff that doesn't work when I could just, spend
Isn't it
5 minutes.
funny how it works out? Um, I, I, I think I've told this story before, but when um, when I had my first five-figure score, it was Mother's Day 2 years ago. Um, and it was a Belmont pick five. And I was on my way to go pick my mom up to go take her out to lunch. So my wife and I were getting ready to go, and I'm like trying to get ready and get all this stuff going. And so I literally launch optics. I handicap these five races in like, I don't know, maybe 5 6 minutes. I put a ticket in. It's like a $24 ticket. And right before we leave, I think the third leg goes off, and I'm still alive. And the fourth leg, we're driving. It's like a 45-minute drive, and so like the fourth leg is somewhere in between. That hits, and so I tell my wife, I'm like, hey, like I need you to watch this race. I'm like, I need, and I forgot which. I think it was like the five and the eight. I'm like, I have the five and the eight. Like, you just gotta let me know what's going on. And so she's like, okay, what? And she's like, why? And I was like, I'm pretty sure the eight's worth like 12 grand, and the five is worth like, I think the five was worth like 9 or 10, something like that. And so she's like, okay. She's like, well, your eight went out to the lead right at the beginning. Like he's in front. I'm like, okay, good. And then she's like, I don't see any other horses. I'm like, what? She's like, I don't see any other horses. Like they're only showing the eight. I'm like, okay. And then like they get to the stretch, and she's like, yeah. She's like, it's just the eight. And so sure enough, like she's just like, I'm like, well, I was like, of course it's the time. I literally took 5 minutes, looked at optics, put a ticket in, and yeah. So sometimes just your best you know your best
Yeah.
intentions, sometimes
Don't
they don't work out. But
don't give yourself time to overthink sometimes in this game. Like you can talk yourself off some pretty long prices, and look, like, yeah, a horse might be, 20 to 1 for a reason, and you could talk yourself off that, but still 20 to 1. That's when it pays. So
yeah, I actually earlier this week I had a couple of times where I think I just was like between two horses, and I was like, all right, I like this horse, and I'm looking at the odds, and it's 7-2, and the other horse I like was, I think, 6-1 or something like that. I'm like, well, all right, well, I'll take the longer price here. And by post time, the odds had flipped. The horse I had originally liked was the longer price of the two, and he ends up winning. And it's just like, you know,
that's the stuff that'll tilt you in this game real
oh
bad.
yeah,
Like just looking at that stuff. I mean, I've had many times. I mean, it happens to everyone, right? Where you end up liking a horse and you talk yourself off, and it ends up breaking you out of a sequence, or like you would have hit a sequence, right? I mean, it happened to me, like, and I've never had a 5 figure score, but if I, the couple times I was live to it, it's always been horses that I've kind of been that last cut. And it's easy for your brain to say that because you look at all of them and you're like, oh, I would have had that, or I could have had that. But that's the stuff I think that'll if you have a long memory in this game, will really, kind of tilt you off of it and put you out of play. And you need a thick skin and a short brain to to
Yeah.
really play this game long term, because you'll have those things that happen. You just talk yourself off of something, or say, "Oh, I don't know, I toss a B just to save money." And
Yeah, funny stuff happens. Like I remember there was a pick five at Santa Anita, and it was a typical winter Santa Anita, like 6 horse field, 6 horse field, 7 horse field, 6 horse field, like real small fields, right?
yep,
So you're like, okay, this thing might pay like $300, right, if you hit it. So I'm trying to be skinny, and so I single in the first leg, and then I'm like 2 by 3 by 2 by 2 or something like that. The rest of the way, and my single gets nosed, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna run back to pick four, but I'm gonna make a change. And sure enough, the horse I actually take off that I had in my pick five, I didn't have in my pick four, wins. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. Like, it's Santa Anita. Like, this pick four is probably gonna pay like $200-300, but I literally went best possible, miss, best possible, and so it was something like like 4-1, 6-1. I think like the other horse was like 2-1, and then another like 4 or 5-1. It paid a couple of grand for the pick four, and I'm just sitting there, and it's funny because our Stephen Fox, the Evil Bob Dole, he's like messaging me. He's like, "Oh, he's like, great job." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I ran back to pick four, but I made a change." He's like, "Why in the world would you do that to yourself?" And yeah, that was
it sounds all too familiar, right? Because I mean, your brain works like mine, probably, where that horse that you cut out of that sequence wins about 98% of the time, right? Seemingly,
mhm.
right? Like you'll never remember the time of that horse doesn't win, but God, if you remember all of them when they come in, and it seems like inevitably they always come in when you do that.
Yeah,
God,
it's
those stick with you. I hate it,
yeah.
but hey, again, joy of this game sometimes. So
But speaking of, you're talking about doing something different. How often do you either print out or buy the form and handicap on paper?
I haven't in a while. When I typically do it is when I go to the track, and it's been a while since I've been to the track. But I went to Belmont on the Friday before the Belmont Stakes, which I much prefer. Like, I would never go to Belmont Day, but last Friday I took a train in from where I am, and it's about given transfers and all that, it's about a 3 hour trip each way. So I had some time to cap on the train, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this the old school way, right? Pen and paper, print out all your forms, print out the sheets, go from there and do it. And honestly, like, I feel like it never works out for me when I do that. It's just something completely different, and I probably change the way I handicap too often. Like, I do screwy stuff. Like, I'm like, oh, I think certain figs are better in certain tracks. So like, I'll buy time form for a certain track, and I'll purchase Briz for a different track because I think their figs, their adjustments are better in certain cases than others, right? Like, I think DRF is really good on the West Coast, but it sucks for the East Coast. Is that a good way to handicap? No, I don't recommend that to anyone. To be inconsistent in the way you do things. But that's typically the way I do it. But yeah, like, anytime I change something like that, where I'm just like, oh, I'm going to print this out, or I'm going to buy DRF for the day because I that's the way I did it 10 years ago, and it'd be fun to do it that way. It is fun, but I don't know. I think I've just gotten so used to capping, like, on my phone or electronically, or being able to, like, click through and see shared races, or in the case of Hong Kong, right? Like, use my data. I'm so reliant on that stuff now that you just feel kind of lost without it, because you're like, this doesn't mean anything, right? Is that time good or bad? How was the track playing that day? What, a lot of the stuff I use doesn't have that information in there. And you get kind of really used to a certain way, and like what data you key in on, even the data I print, right? Like, I don't adjust stuff, but there's certain things that I have in there that I just never look at, and it doesn't matter. There's other things that I'm, again, completely relying on, like how forward or backward a track was playing on a given day. And without that stuff, I feel like sometimes I'm just guessing. And yeah, so the short answer to your question is sometimes, but it doesn't tend to end well for me when I change stuff, even though I change stuff kind of often.
Yeah. Yeah, Chase used to always call it mixing sauces. There's some people who are good at it, and like, I know like Caleb, for example, he'll have we'll be at the track and he'll have his like Surface Pro, and he'll have like five different products, and he's literally just like sitting there and he's just like swiping left and right and getting the different things. I mean, now he's swiping left and right for different reasons, but he's sitting there just swiping, and just like going back between products. And I'm like, maybe two. I'll look at Briz and Timeform most, optics every once in a while if I'm just looking, if I see a bias, or I think, um, if I'm trying to just get an idea quickly, I'll look at optics. But yeah, it's interesting. Andrew, funny enough, when we were talking on one of our recent pods, he was mentioning, he said something like, people can actually handicap on this. I don't know how. And he was like showing his phone. And I was like, if I like, the amount of races I've handicapped on my phone is staggering. The staggering amount of races I think I've probably handicapped on my phone. So it doesn't bother me as much as I guess it bothers Boomer Andrew, but who's younger than me, so it shouldn't bother him. I don't understand why this man's got old eyes, but
I think it's just what you use, right? Like I tend to cap a lot lazier on my phone. I'll put it that way, right? Like I should check shared races. I should, follow through and see how good or bad a fig is. And I think sometimes I do better on big days because, you take that time to see, okay, what's the edge here? Where if I'm looking at like a $5,000 claimer at Turfway, right? How long am I spending on that race? Am I going back and watching replays? Am I going back to see how horses ran back? That's hard on your phone to click through and do that.
yeah,
So, um, it just tends towards lazy handicapping. And as our good friend Dark says, there's no shortcuts in this game, unfortunately, right? And so you're not surprised when you do that. I think it's also understanding, right? Like sizing bets around that, right? I'll play something I've tried to get a lot better at, I think, is understanding when I'm confident in a sequence and when I'm not. And even if I don't have, if I'm too addicted to bet something where I shouldn't, at least I know now not to invest as much money, right? If I put, a base wager on something versus dialing it up because I'm really confident in a race, that doesn't always work out, but at least, you're betting around your opinions. Whereas I think if you asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I would say, regardless of my opinion, I'm going to bet, $2, right? Like I come in knowing the bet and tailoring your handicapping around that. I think that's where people fall into a trap. The handicapping is the easy part. The hard part, I think, in this game really is understanding how to bet
yeah,
sometimes, right? How to size your wagers, how to, you know, really capitalize when you are right, because you're going to be wrong a lot of the time, but you need to, when you are right, you need to, make it pay, as our good friend Bobby Mark says. So, uh, yeah, I think that's something I'm trying to get better at. By no means am I good at it, but um, yeah, I think that's at least something that I now understand a little bit better. Of if you're going to hack for 5 minutes on your phone, you should bet accordingly. If you're
yeah,
going to do it that way.
yeah, for sure. But speaking of sequences, we got a late pick three here at Sha Tin, and we're gonna start with a Group Three handicap. So most group races are, um, they are just everyone same weight, but in this case, we do have a handicap. So so the high weight here is gonna be 135. Is gonna be the one straight Aaron. Um, and that's kind of actually where my eyes went in this race. Um, I don't know how your figures are looking compared to what Speed Pro has, but this just looks like the fastest horse on paper. It has got the best back figs. Is got nice figures at the distance. I think has been going against definitely much harder competition than a lot of the rest of the field here, and you get a horse that is carrying a high weight, but there's no Zach in this race, which is kind of where my eyes tend to go when looking at jockeys and at Sha
especially in
Tin.
group races. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you get Hugh Bowman, who's I think, like we've talked about this before, but I think to me he's clear number two here, with Karis Teeton, kind of number three, but he gets the mount here. He's ridden this horse before, in a group two, and he gets drawn inside. He gets a three post, and so we've talked a little bit um, about the draw and how that helps and hurts horses. And generally, you want horses that are drawn inside. You don't want, with them being so many horses, you get the 12, 13, 14 posts, which we don't often see in U.S. racing, gets used quite often. So, I kind of landed on three kind of inside drawn horses in this spot. I thought a horse like the four Senor Toba made some sense, but he's drawn out in post 11. And so that kind of moved it down. And I thought the two Encountered also has some races that absolutely fit. But he's out in the 12 post. If we look at his last race out in the 12 post, just kind of ran an even eighth the entire time. And I mean, in fact, even when he went in the rail, he kind of ran the same. So maybe this is just a horse that's off form. He is coming off a month break. But yeah, I don't know. I thought the one Straight Aaron was probably the horse to beat in the spot. I had two other horses I did like in the 5 Sword Point and the 6 Happy Together. I think the 6 Happy Together, if you're a form handicapper, I mean, obviously is the horse that stands out. He's got 4 wins in his last 5 starts. He's got 1 win at this distance already. And that was obviously his last race at Happy Valley, which is a different track, different surface. But goes from that Group 3 handicap, comes here, has to take a couple of pounds, but not really that many. He's only going up 3 pounds even after that win. Um, so, you might. I think visually on form, this horse makes a ton of sense. I don't necessarily know what he was beating at Happy Valley. The figure on Speed Pro kind of came back. I mean, it came back fine. I think it fit with some of these other horses, but that wasn't standout figure by any means. Whereas I think the 5 Sword Point is kind of the opposite. On form, I'm got a second and a first in his last 5, but those other races look a little suspect. He's got 2 sixth and an 11th, but all those races came back pretty fast. Obviously, Zach was riding him, and so is Hugh Bowman, and now he's on Lyle Hewitson, which is kind of in. He's if you're not familiar, he's kind of like after the top three, you kind of got like the second tier where there's just a bunch of guys that are like real close together, like your Manny Franco of of. I mean, actually, I hate Manny Franco, so maybe that's a bad example. But
That's okay. I hate Lyle Hewitson, so
uh, but
it's
uh, so, but I think at least if you're a more figure driven person, I think the 5 Sword Point makes a ton of sense here, even though his form doesn't necessarily look great. He's drawn well. And the last 2 races he hasn't. I mean, the last race he was drawn sixth, but obviously he's drawn in the 4 post here, which is a good spot to be. So I'm gonna I'm of course I'm gonna like open up the peep or my ADW and place this bet, and I'm gonna see I took the 3 shortest prices, but I think I like the 1 the most here as an A, and then I like the 5 and the 6 Sword Point and Happy Together as a B.
yep. Yeah, morning line wise, you're actually spot on. You took the 3 shortest prices, so
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you.
Just a couple of things on those horses. I think I tried to go different directions, but I think I agreed with the way you capped it. Straight Aaron, I think, is the most talented horse in this field, unquestionably. If you look at the last race, straight, I mean, it's a Group 1 reminder that the Group 1 wasn't handicapped, right? So everyone's sitting at 126. So that horse gets 0 pounds versus everyone else in that field. And obviously against much tougher competition. So horse breaks in midair, kind of rushes up on the rail. You see it had a good draw last time, but it kind of was a misnomer because it wasted a lot of energy kind of being inside, and then never really looks comfortable getting hemmed in. Has to swing out 4 wide into the stretch, and just kind of tails off at the end. The problem I have with it is it's given up 20 pounds in this field, and this happens in these group races, right? You have these kind of monster rating horses that end up dwarfing a field, and the problem with that is there's some really talented horses at the bottom of it, right? You don't end up racing in a group three unless you have some ability and some talent. And giving up 20 pounds is just such a huge ask that I tend to not want to bet those horses unless they're so far and away better. And I don't think Straight Aaron's that much far and away better. It's bounced around a lot. It's run 2 turn races. It's run miles. I don't really know what it wants to do. And anytime I have questions in a handicap race with a horse that I'm confused whether or not it really wants this, I tend to try and look a different direction. So I think the horse is super talented, but I think it'll take a lot of money. And I think to that respect, it's a bit of an overlay. And I'll try and either use it as a soft B or get around it. I think same sort of thing, like you mentioned from Happy Together, right? This horse probably takes a fair bit of money. I think it's a rather open field. It's been on that meteoric rise from class three, and if I have a weakness here, it's that I keep thinking when horses are moving up in class like that, they're eventually going to hit something that they can't, you know, hang on to. And I swear I've been on the wrong side of this horse for since the change, right? I mean, you see it started in class three, it won, moved up to class two, it won, finished third, moved up to class two again, it won, grade three open last time, it won. Where's it going to stop, right? And so once again, though, I'm going to say it's going to stop, right? It's doesn't look fast enough, and I don't like the weight that it's getting, even though it's only carrying 118. So I don't know. Again, I'm going to go in a different direction, thinking it's going to take a lot of money and probably end up eating crow, not playing it. So those are the ones I want to get around. The couple of the places I did want to go, I love low weight here, right? And I think there's a couple horses to me that stood out because of that. I think the first one, the 12, Nimble Nimbus. I think I've bet this horse before a couple times, and haven't really ever cashed in on it. But if you look the last race, you can kind of see the importance of draw, right? And granted, it was at Happy Valley, so that's a 2 turn race. I think it would prefer 1 turn. So with the better draw, getting back to Sha Tin, I think that's part of it. But if you look, like Zenny was on it last time, and it's drawn poorly. It's a horse that wants to kind of get up front, get to the lead, and he sends it real hard. It just ends up 3 wide into the first turn, and it's one of those things where you bet that horse, and immediately you're like, ah, shit, I'm like, there's no chances. This horse is screwed, right? It's just sitting in the 3 path, and he keeps it in the 3 path the whole way around, right? It gets floated out the first turn, it stays out there. He's kind of trying to get it to the rail, and whoever's on the inside, if these jockeys do anything really well, it's that they know position and they know how to jockey around to prevent your position, right? They know how, if you're trying to get over to the rail, they see what you want to do. You can even see Etienne, he's like looking to the right to try and get over. And that's a signal that I have you over a barrel and I'm not going to let you in here. I'm just going to, float your horse out there. So it's one of those rides that's incredibly frustrating, but it still stays well on into the stretch, right? It's a hot pace. It has to duel up front because it's trying to gun towards that lead, and the other horses are trying to prevent it from getting in. I think, with any sort of better trip and the low weight here, right, carrying 115, that's a horse that I'm looking back to. So give me the 12, as an A in that respect. The other one I really like was the 10. I'm going to butcher probably the pronunciation, Tourbillon Diamond. Um, the last 3 races have been at 2 turns, and finally it gets back to 1 turn. Keep in mind, 1800 here is still 1 turn, so it's a long stretch, or a long way to get out. The race that I look back to, November 19th, that last split, the horse is at max weight. It's obviously in class two. It's running at 135. But the last split home was in 22 and 2. That's massive going this distance. You don't see 22 and 2 from a closing split, even though that pace was kind of soft. I mean, that's just something that, jumps off the page. And at 115 pounds, right, 20 pounds lighter from that, if you see a horse coming home in 22 and 2, that has some ability. This horse has been very frustrating. It's kind of bounced around, and a little bit schizophrenic, and like, is the horse going to want to run today or not? So it's one of those horses that I think you bet and you take a price on, and if it finishes out the back, you just chalk it up and say, hey, it wasn't that day, and you kind of got to look to it again because it seems to kind of decide day of race whether it wants to run. But I'm hoping today is one of those days, and you can get a price. So I think the 12 and the 10 are where I look to. probably play some softer Bs with the 1, maybe the 6, and maybe even the 13. The 13, I think, for no other reason than you get a low weight, you get Karis Teton up on board. Um, there's not a ton to like in that, and the horse is over 4 at the distance, doesn't really look fast enough, but it's hard to avoid a good jock with low weight getting up and getting a little bit better draw, cutting back to 1 turn. So maybe worth a shot if you get a really good price on that 13 too.
Yeah, I definitely looked at the 10 for a bit. Um, I ended up kind of going elsewhere there. I thought the 9 and the 11 both made were a little interesting. The 11 is kind of I mean, has been running in class 2 and has been running pretty well in class 2. And then they put him in a group 2 for some reason, and then they ran him against Junko and some other real serious horses in that group 1
Yep.
um, back. Kind of came back down to group 2 again, and um, he ran second. But I don't know. At least on the notes, it looks like didn't really have the best of trips the last 2 times, and has run pretty well. Hey, maybe third time's the charm, and maybe this horse gets a clean trip, being on the rail this time. But I thought the 11 was a little bit interesting, and then as well as the 9. The nine's another one that I think is kind of had a little bit of trouble in some of these harder races, and obviously is getting a much softer field here. Um, I have a this is kind of a tough race because you do have a couple of horses coming out of that Happy Valley Group 3 handicap race, um, and I think your opinion on that race is kind of what would drive horses. So if you don't think that race is necessarily all that great, I think you got a lot of you got a couple horses, like I said, you can eliminate and go from there. But um, yeah, this is an interesting race. I think a lot of times some of these group races they just look super chalky. Apparently, I also thought it looked super chalky since apparently I picked the chalk. But yeah, there's all with it there being so many horses and a bunch of horses coming from Happy Valley, horses coming from Group 1s, and some horses moving up in class. I think um, you get a real interesting mix there. So it's gonna be a fun race. Moving on, race 9, the Gladiolus handicap here. We're gonna be going the old unicorn distance, 7 furlongs here, 1,400 meters. And we are in class 4 here. And where did you? I'll let you go first here. Where did you kind of land here?
Yeah, I think the obvious choice, and I think where all the money is going to go, is to the 4 top scorer, right? If you look, that horse has been knocking on the door twice. Zach still is up. Um, it hasn't run poorly at all. I think it's going to take probably too much money, so I'll just get that one out of the way and say, hey, you know I I like it. I think it'll make all the sense in the world, but you're not going to get any money out of it. So I went a couple other places. The first one was the 6 Joyous Spring. I thought, like I said, I try and look for horses that are kind of had excuses last time and then adjust back, right? If you had something that caused you to run poorly last time and now you get an advantage because of that, if you had a bad draw or a bad jock up or whatever, what changes now, and how do how can you take advantage of that, right? Because the prices are usually going to be based on what that was last time. So a couple things here, right? Obviously you upgrade from Abdullah to Hugh Bowman, right? I've explained before my tendency to bet some pretty poor jocks that don't have a very good win rate. I think Brendan Abdullah is like 2%. Hugh Bowman is obviously much more than that. If you watch the replay, and the last time Abdullah kind of hems it in the stretch, it doesn't really get a clear run. He stays towards the rail, but he kind of takes it inside. And part of the problem, especially at Sha Tin, sometimes is you take it inside and you're behind this wall of horses and you think you're going to be able to weave through. Sometimes that works out, but sometimes it doesn't, right? You get a horse that's, not eating dirt because it's turf, but at least, seeing horses kick up in front of it and it just has that natural reaction. And then you see it kind of once it gets that open run. it does, close off pretty well. So to me, look, you get 3 pounds because Abdullah, gives it a poor ride, and he should be able to get in a better position than Brandon did. I'll say that. So I really like the six Joy of Spring. Um, I kind of like the 11 Sunlight Power, although I think everyone's going to see what it did last time and kind of take that as the very obvious choice, right? It loses by a neck last time. It broke from the 14 post and, closed off from the back. And I think sometimes we fall into this trap of betting like these sexy deep closers. You tend to want to do that in turf racing of like, oh, look at that huge kick. If it was, any closer, it would have won that race, right? And with the better draw, it's definitely going to romp this time. Maybe that's true, but I also think everyone sees that, right? And the tote kind of adjusts to that and says, "Oh, look, it has so many excuses last time. There's a reason it was that far back, and is it going to leave itself too much to do?" So I like the 11. I thought, you know, give me that ability because it keeps the same weight. It moves in. It should improve, but we'll see. I think again, trying to close from last place if it's doing that again might be a tall order in this field. The last horse that I liked, I think I was trying to figure out, okay, if I'm liking all the deep closers from the 4, the 6, and the 11, what tends to happen for me is they go out incredibly slow and they just run it around like a merry-go-round, and all the closers end up sucking up for third, and I end up, losing out on my bet because I didn't actually, the jockeys did the same thing, right? They all
Hmm.
kind of geared up for that soft run, and they all ran out in a stupid slow pace, and then they never get there. That it happened last week, for anyone watching those races. It tends to happen more often than not, where you end up with the best horses or closers, they can set it up poorly and end up shooting themselves in the foot, and you get a price on a horse that just walked it like a merry-go-round. I don't really trust any of the speed in here, so I kind of defaulted to the 10 Patch of Time. It's obviously the lightest weight. I didn't really trust the 3. I forget who's on the 3.
Ariel, yeah.
Ariel, yeah. I mean, obviously that gets the best draw. I don't know. I just didn't. I don't really trust the jockeys, right? Like I said, I don't trust Lyle Hewitson. I don't really trust Luke Ferraris either. But with a better draw and the lighter weight, I think maybe the 10 tries to send. And obviously it's drawn just outside that 3. But I do think they potentially both go. And hey, if you can get some extra pounds on what the 3 is doing, maybe that 10 can get out and get a lead. So just as a B, I thought if I was going to take a pace, I would take the 10 Patch of Time here.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do with Patch of Time because unlike you, I do like 3 here, Ariel. Um, and yeah, the 10 obviously is also last time, going just a little bit longer. So it's going to be drawn right, and they're drawn right next to each other. I believe these are two, and Ariel's, yeah, Ariel's on the rail. So um, I, Ariel was almost a single for me until I saw that. So I don't know if this is just like, hey, let's use both the speeds here. Maybe I'll put a B with a question mark here next to Patch of Time. But if for some reason he doesn't go, I think Ariel could have a bit of a soft lead and maybe will. I mean, you hate to see the note every chance caught late, on a speed horse. But I guess I'll go back to that well. Um, I'm fading top scorer just based off of uh, John Size, Zach Purton, similar to Irad and Chad Brown. If they've run twice and haven't broke the maiden yet, maybe we'll try and fade it the third time out there. So we'll go ahead and we'll have a fade on the 4 top score. But yeah, these are the types of horses, right? Like you'll see these horses that have really lightly raced. They're racing against winners in class 4, and usually sometimes it's just a lightly raced horse that wins. But the other horse that I'm going to use is the 5 here, Master Tornado. Was running a Happy Valley, running slightly longer, just a little over a mile. And I think last time the cutback really, really helped this horse out. A little bit of trouble on the stretch and just missed by a nose. at a good price. So you get you get Karis Teton again. You get the same distance. You get a slightly different course, but um, he wasn't. He was kind of just sitting mid pack, right? He's sitting fourth, just off by a length and a quarter. That seems to be that tracking run style seems to be what he wants to do, and I think that just in this race that doesn't seem to have a ton of speed. I think that's a safer trip to bet on than going for the horse that's going to loop from 10th or 11th from this from the back. So I'm gonna take five as kind of the presser I like in here. Three, 5 and 3 are my top choices, and then I'm gonna use the 10 a little bit here, patch of time. It's kind of just that backup speed horse, just in case. You know, if there's only two speed horses, a speed duel doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna melt. You need at least three horses usually for some type of meltdown. So sometimes they'll duel, and whoever wins the duel will keep going. So um, yeah, 3, 5, and 10 for me. And then we're gonna finish with everyone's favorite, an all weather track race. Going 6 furlongs here, 1,200 meters. They don't run many of these. What do you think they run more of? You think they run more turf races in the U.S. or more all weather races, like percent all weather races in Hong Kong?
Um, it's got to be turf in the US, right? I mean, there's still tracks that run, 50-50, or at least, 25, 30, 40% turf races. And I mean, there's full cards here that don't have any all weather races. Maybe they start that once it gets colder. I got to look back and say, okay, once it hits that true like winter season, do they start trying to save the turf a little bit more just because, grass doesn't grow back as fast or things like that.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I didn't look through this whole card. I know the first race I think is a dirt race. Obviously, the last race is. I don't know if there's any other ones on this card. Even there might be one or two in there. But yeah, I mean, aside from the occasional like full day that they have, keep in mind, I mean, they run. Happy Valley doesn't even have a dirt track, right? So once every 3 4 months, you'll get an all dirt racing Wednesday at Sha Tin. Those are good days to take a break, I think, from playing this place. But yeah, I'd say slightly at least, U.S. turf, with the caveat that this place doesn't use dirt as a secondary track. I mean, if it's pouring, they run. So it's not like they have an all weather and you see it like yesterday at Santa Anita where it rained 2 days ago. We're off the turf, right? There's no off the turf here. They're either on the turf or they're canceling. So take that as you will. I think it's slightly the U.S., but obviously it's much different than the way
yeah.
they use it. So
Um, but yeah, so this race, we are in class two, and I landed on two horses in this spot. I think I took a page out of your book. When a lot of the horses look kind of samey or not great, take the little weight. So the 11 Magnac here, won last time out in Group Threes, moving up in class here, and this is dirt. They're you think like an American when you're capping these races. I don't think you necessarily want to be coming from super super far back, but yeah, this is a presser type. Is drawn in the 7 post, so it is drawn a little bit outside, but I think for a pressing trip, I think that should be fine. Should be able to get up into that second or third flight of horses, and track the pace. Obviously, one last time out, going this distance, is going to get, I think, a jockey switch, but is getting an apprentice that's been riding okay. Winning at about 10% here, and you get, not only do you get the low weight, but you get another 5 pounds allowance due to the apprentice. So um, yeah, you're gonna be carrying 110 pounds with this horse, which is crazy. So I think a 110-pound horse coming off a win against a bunch of horses. I don't know if there's necessarily a ton a ton of dirt horses in this race. So I'm kind of looking at the horses that have run well on the dirt. I think maybe the 10 Gummy Gummy might be one that's interesting as well as a dirt horse. But hey, he did all that great running with Zach Pert and Zach ain't here. But Yeah, I didn't use a 10, but I did use the 7 exponential. I think, as good as Zach is, I do think that he is not always he doesn't always lead on the all weather track. For the longest time, that was Morera. He and it was kind of funny because I think Morera when he would win when he I think he won the riding title once or twice, but when he won, he was like winning like 30 something percent on the all weather track, and it was pretty insane. But Karis Teton, I think does very very well on the all weather track. Obviously keeps him here aboard. They're basically running it back, and this is going to be a forwardly placed horse. A little concerned about the post. It is stuck out in the parking lot, but I'll take my chances there with the 7. But that's all I'm going to use there. Is I'm going to use 7 and the 11 in this spot.
So yeah, I think just on your comment on draw, right? And it's hard because there's a lot less all weather races or dirt races here, so it's harder to get stats on them. But there's a huge disparity in turf. You can kind of see the times change between a 1 draw and a 14 draw.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really see the same thing on the dirt for whatever reason.
Interesting.
You get an advantage in the one post, but out from that, like 2 through 12 are kind of flat. They're kind of all over the place, and that's regardless of class, regardless of distance. I don't think draw matters as much, or at least it hasn't historically when you look at like times from the past 3 years. So I tend to put less into draw on the dirt than I do on the turf. Now, I don't claim to be a successful dirt handicapper here, but I will say I think, like you said, right, it's dirt racing, so it's a little more straightforward. And I think this is where like me creating my own figs actually does work. Part of the problem with capping dirt, I mentioned like those Wednesday Sha Tin cards, is horses don't really run on it that often. So you get a case where you don't have any data to base it off of. The nice thing about this race is you do, right? Every horse I think in here, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions, has run on the all weather before. So you know what they can do, you know what they're capable of. And that makes it really kind of straightforward, I think, to me, of, just bet the horse with the best fig and then go from there. If I don't care about draw, I factor in weight as I normally do. Just bet the fastest horse and be done with it. Don't worry about anything else. Whereas in turf racing, you're kind of trying to shape the race up, say how is this going to play out? Does it go too fast up front? Things like that. And I don't think any of that really matters when it comes to dirt racing. So it's a little bit easier in that respect. I love the 11, like you said. Weight matters, and getting 5-pound bugs running at 110 pounds. That horse looks like the fastest in the field. It's looked great on the all weather. Um, the other place I went to the 2. I wasn't sure if moving up in class for that 11, they wanted to go with the bug jock just to kind of give it a better chance in class 3. It does move up, so are they trying to keep that weight as low as possible to be competitive? I'm not sure if that's why Hugh Bowman's off or if Hugh Bowman went to the 2, but at the same time, the 2 has looked very well on the track too, right? It's like that surface. The figs, are right there with the 11. So in case that's a choice for Hugh Bowman and he's choosing the 2 off of a win from the 11 horse, I'm gonna use the 2 as an A season's wit as well. And then the third horse I went with the 3 Ping Hai Galaxy. It's funny, we capped these things backwards, right? Like I capped the last 3 races first to do this, and then I kind of backfill throughout the day to cap the races 1 through 7. So when I looked at race 10, this is the first time Mikhail Barcelona popped up, and I was like, oh, he's here. Hey, that's fun. Why is he here? I have no idea what he's doing. So maybe there's some sort of race earlier in the card where he's actually here for. I can't imagine he's here for a class 3 dirt race, but it's still, you do get a jockey upgrade. I think the horse is 2 for 3 on the dirt. I don't really know what happened last out. It was on the rail. Like I said, I think the rail is a huge advantage when it comes to dirt. That's the one place where I do think figs are better. But at the same time, a horse kind of bobbles at the break. It rushes up inside, gets the lead on the turn. It's an odd race, though, because if you look at it, it's the only horse sitting inside of the 3 path. It's like gliding along the rail and just running in, trying to run home. And every other horse is sitting 3 paths out, which makes me think that all the jockeys, except for who was on it last up?
Alexa Bedell.
Was it Bedell?
Yeah,
Or was it Hugh
Hugh
Bowman?
Bowman
Or
was
no,
on
Bedell.
in the
Bedell
dirt.
was on the turf race. That's right. So it makes me think that Bedell was the only one not seeing what was actually going on with that dirt and like sitting inside on a dead rail. And so the thing it's running in the straight and it just kind of drops anchor and finishes out the back and the fig looks awful. But maybe that's one of those things where it's just like, okay, Alexi Bedell didn't have any idea what the bias was that day, and it looks bad because it drops anchor. Otherwise, I mean, the horse is 2 for 2 if you toss that race out. So I think the 3 to me is still very capable of running a good race. Does Barcelona have any idea how to ride all weather here? We'll find out. But
Hmm.
ability wise, I think some of those back figs, if you look at like the race, even December 3rd race, right? That fits here, right? It gets the lead and it just runs all the way around. So yeah, give me the 3 Ping High Galaxy as well, in addition to the 2 and the 11.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's gonna do it for us. Obviously, check Matt's picks. He usually puts the whole card up unless he's gonna actually
Yeah,
hit
I'm
most of the
hot not
races.
doing it, so maybe I'll just if it worked on Wednesday, maybe I'll just go back and not post anything and then redboard it on Twitter if I actually hit. So
There you go. But at Slow and Steady for Matt, I'm at Cherry Drank. Yeah, check us out on thewronglead.com at wrong_lead. We are going to be doing the live streams again. TBD on the date. We might be changing days a little bit, but yeah, got a lot of content coming out. Good luck today if you guys play. Have a good one.